ثلاث بوسات. اثنين ثلاثة وأربعة. أهلا 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 بالقيادات اللي جاية معاك. الأوضة نوار بالذات. لا لا معقول. فين أيام كنا بنشوف بعض مرتين ثلاثة. أهلا سيد سفير. أهلا سيد عام. أهلا وسهلا صح. أهلا. ده كنا زمان بنشوف بعض مرتين ثلاثة في الأسبوع، دلوقتي بقالي 9 أشهر ما شفتش.
إنما فرحانين بيك وفرحانين بيك.
ربنا يخليك.
وبنتعايق بيك.
لا استغفر الله.
أنا والله حقيقي.
إزيك؟
الحمد لله وحشتك وربنا يوفقك بالليلة كلنا.
لا ده
كل مصر كلها كل أفريقيا كلها.
طب الحمد لله ما دام أفريقيا ومصر دي مهمة أوي العالم.
مش عايزك كمان تدعو لك.
Thank you.
Hello. Hello. I'm Marilyn King. I'm a United States Olympian. It is a privilege to be here today, and I'm happy to welcome you to the observation of the World Habitat Day. This year's World Habitat Day observance focuses on the theme Shelter and Sustainable Development. The Executive Director of United Nations Center for Human Settlements, Dr. Arkat Ramachandran, will now give his welcome address.
His Excellency Dr. Boutros Ghali, Secretary General of the United Nations, Her Royal Highness Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We at the United Nations Center for Human Settlements Habitat feel especially honored to be able to welcome you all to this World Habitat Day observance. We are grateful to the distinguished Secretary General for his presence here today, which greatly enhances the significance of the occasion. We extend particular welcome to our special guest, Her Royal Highness, the Countess of Snowdon, who has come from across the seas to lend her gracious presence to the occasion and thus underscore her support for the cause of shelter for all. We are confident that today's observance will serve to carry the World Habitat Day message of adequate shelter for all in a livable environment to the farthest reaches of the globe. The world, as we are witness, is undergoing momentous change in all directions, some of it tumultuous and even painful, others more subtle but equally profound. Both throughout all of this tumult, all of this change, one thing has remained constant, one thing which indeed cannot conceivably change, namely essential human needs. And of these needs, of course, shelter, which we highlight today, ranks second only to food. This then, to my mind, is the point of World Habitat Day and for our coming together on this occasion to draw attention to the critical needs of our fellow human beings. A corollary of this distinguished guest is that we also take the occasion of World Habitat Day to recognize the efforts of those who have actually done or are doing something on the ground to help alleviate the problems of homelessness or inadequate shelter. The recipients of this year's Building and Social Housing Foundation Awards and the Habitat Scroll of Honor are precisely such people, and I therefore take the opportunity to congratulate them and to applaud their contribution to the cause. They have certainly lived the maxim, think globally, act locally. Our special thanks go out also to the Building and Social Housing Foundation of the United Kingdom and of its energetic director, Peter Elderfield, for their continued sponsorship of the World Habitat Awards. Finally, let me recall that this year's World Habitat Day theme is Shelter for Sustainable Development. There is a hope expressed in this theme, which I may be permitted to restate. It is the hope for a sustainable future, a future in which every person is assured a decent place to be born, a decent place to grow up, and a decent place to lead his or her life in health and in dignity as a human being. This is our hope. May it also be our cause. Once again, I have great pleasure in welcoming you to World Habitat Day 1992. Thank you.
Now may I present to you His Excellency Dr. Boutros Ghali, the Distinguished Secretary General of the United Nations, who will deliver the World Habitat Day message.
Your Royal Highness Princess Margaret, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, shelter is a key word for the United Nations. Indeed, shelter describes much of what the United Nations does. In a wider, more political sense, shelter and protection sum up our mission. They remind us that the Charter of the United Nations is founded on faith in the dignity of the human person. The United Nations exists to assist and promote shelter and protection. Although the United Nations as an organization is crucially based on the sovereignty of member states, its mission as the upholder of human dignity everywhere transcends national boundaries. It reaches out to all those whose human dignity is impaired, whether by poverty, homelessness, or infringements of human rights. In so doing, it aims to guarantee to individuals the private space which is a prerequisite for an individual's self-respect and for family life. Just as a shelter in the sense of dwelling place protects an individual or family from the wind and rain, so the United Nations must be a shelter in the metaphorical sense for those who suffer inequity, injustice, and oppression. Today's theme, Shelter for Sustainable Development, could hardly be more practical. Its message is very clear. There can be no sustainable development while there are over 1 billion homeless people in the world. Not only can there be no sustainable development as long as millions remain without adequate housing, there can be no peace or security either. Homelessness is an insult to human dignity. It is therefore an obstacle to sustainable development and a potential threat to peace and security. The United Nations is today honoring people and organizations that have made practical contributions to the task of providing housing for the homeless. The United Nations must combine clear vision with a sense of the practical and clear divisions of responsibilities between international, regional, national, and local authorities. The contributions that have been made all seem to me to have one thing in common. They have mobilized new resources, material, financial, but above all, human, in the struggle to provide decent housing. I hope their work, which is being recognized today, will become demonstration projects that others will learn from and build on them. Mesdames et messieurs, cette rencontre d'aujourd'hui qui met à l'honneur le développement durable me rappelle nos travaux du sommet de Rio. Nous y fûmes tous d'accord pour dire que la pauvreté était une menace pour l'environnement, bien des peuples étant acculés à sacrifier des ressources essentielles, c'est-à-dire l'avenir même, pour s'assurer une vie quotidienne précaire au présent. Je crois que nous pouvons pousser cette idée plus loin. La conscience d'appartenir à un monde menacé doit nourrir un nouvel esprit de responsabilité, un esprit de responsabilité universelle. Mais cela suppose que, pour commencer, chaque être échappe à la précarité. Comment demander à un individu d'avoir le sens de la collectivité humaine tout entière quand lui-même est à la merci du froid, de l'insécurité, de la faim? De quoi peut être solidaire un être qui, littéralement, n'a ni feu ni lieu? Ni feu ni lieu, c'est presque ni foi ni loi. Mesdames et messieurs, j'avais rapproché au sommet de Rio les mots écologie et économie, comme venant l'un et l'autre de la racine grecque éco, signifiant la maison. Écologie et économie ont deux sens proches et désignent la bonne administration des ressources de la maison. Ce n'est pas solliciter les mots que de dire que la disposition d'un toit, d'un foyer, d'une famille, d'une maison est l'école d'un esprit de responsabilité universelle vis-à-vis de toute la planète. Que les nantis se le disent, ceux qui sont dépourvus d'une maison ne peuvent se sentir solidaires face aux périls que nous affrontons tous. L'humanité n'affrontera jamais solidairement les dangers qui menacent la planète si chacun ne s'y reconnaît pas une place sûre, un cadre de vie, une maison grâce auquel il sait qu'il est un habitant de la planète Terre. Tel est, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, le message que j'ai tenu à délivrer devant vous aujourd'hui en ce jour de réflexion universelle sur l'un des plus graves sujets qui soit pour notre temps et pour chacun de nos continents. Merci.
And now, Mr. Peter Enderfield, Director, Building and Social Housing Foundation, will introduce the prize-winning projects.
Your Royal Highness, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, Executive Director, distinguished guests, as I look around this hall, I'm not looking at you, I'm looking at the millions of people I've seen around the world who are homeless and desperate for homes. Since His Royal Highness, Prince Charles, presented our first World Habitat Award in 1986, it has been received by a total of 14 excellent projects worldwide. Each of them has been distinguished by self-help, self-reliance, and trust in the people. Projects where governments have empowered the people to do their own thing. Mr. Secretary General, as you may know, in 1988, an award winner was the Ismailia Development Project in your country, a successful self-financing urban development program enabling 400,000 people at an affordable price to get decent and good homes. The project was unique. Now it is being used as a development model throughout the whole world of developing countries. Today, Your Royal Highness, we have two projects of outstanding merit, and, if you'll permit me so to say, we are fortunate in having a person of your quality, your warmth, and your well-known appreciation of aesthetic quality to present the two awards to them. The Kampung Improvement Program, KIP, in Surabaya, Indonesia, has brought a better lifestyle to 961,000 people already. What were makeshift dwellings have been improved. They have neat and clean roads and footpaths. There is abundant planting of trees, shrubs and flowering plants, and we have a sweet-smelling settlement in which the residents have great pride. They themselves organize the work, and they are responsible for the ongoing maintenance. It is appropriate there is a large delegation here from Surabaya to receive the award in a community project of which all the residents of Surabaya are and should be extremely proud. The other project to win the award is Tampines New Town and other new towns in Singapore. Some of us, sir, think of Singapore as a city-state, probably similar in today as Hamburg. Or more romantically, I like to think of it as Venice of old. Venice, which used to be the leading city-state in the world. Through hard work, intelligence, coupled with wise political leadership, by using innovative design and planning concepts, new towns of tomorrow, new towns for £2,000, the next century, are being created and developed in Singapore. Unemployment has been eradicated, and many are living together. Many nations, many ethnic groups are living together in Singapore as one nation in an outstandingly attractive environment. My Lord Napier and Escrit, words and pictures, and my words, are inadequate to describe the projects in Surabaya and in Singapore. I respectfully request you to get out your diary and make an entry in the diary for Her Royal Highness for 6 days towards the end of May next year, 3 days in Singapore, Your Royal Highness, and 3 days in Surabaya, where a study visit is being arranged for people from around the world. If you will kindly come, visit the projects and see for yourself and give added inspiration to the people there and to the people of the world to show what can be done by their own efforts without dependency upon governments, bureaucrats, or anyone else. Your Royal Highness, with the entry already in your diary, you may be gracious enough to consider this request. It's the 700th anniversary of the city of Surabaya. It's a very, very special occasion, and you perhaps will be kind enough to open these 2 short conference workshops, which are open to worldwide to poor people who are trying to provide their own houses, their own homes. We can find the fares for the people to come, we can find the accommodation for the people to replicate what they will see. and your presence will be an inspiration to peoples around the world. And Your Royal Highness, we would appreciate it very much if you can attend. Thank you very much.
Her Royal Highness, the Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon, will now address our meeting.
I'm particularly pleased to have been asked to present this year's World Habitat Awards. For apart from anything else, it allows me to play some small part in the many worldwide activities marking World Habitat Day. The problems of providing adequate shelter for the poor seem to be ever increasing. They are being added to daily by worldwide unrest, famine, and drought. We hear and read so much about these problems, yet seem to be able to do so little to solve them. The goal of adequate shelter for all is becoming ever more difficult to attain. And this, of course, makes the objective a much more worthwhile achievement. If we are to move towards this, we must persevere and bring forward new shelter projects and schemes in increasing numbers, one by one if necessary. So it is the best of such schemes that we are honouring today. All are examples of innovative projects which will inspire others to do likewise, and as such they deserve to be given worldwide recognition. They show the way forward in finding solutions to this immense problem of providing suitable accommodation for the poor. I congratulate the winners of the awards most warmly, and the Building and Social Housing Foundation for awarding them.
The Building and Social Housing Foundation of the United Kingdom initiated in 1985 an annual international housing competition for the World Habitat Award. The competition seeks to identify innovative and successful human settlement projects throughout the world, which can be replicated elsewhere. The awards are given annually in cooperation with the United Nations Center for Human Settlements and are given to projects in both developed and developing countries, which offer sustainable futures for the residents and which present practical and imaginative solutions to housing needs. The winners of the 1991 awards are, first, Kampung Improvement Program in Surabaya, Indonesia. This program, executed by the Directorate General for Human Settlements, Ministry of Public Works, Indonesia, relates to a community-based approach in pioneering a new mode of shelter upgrading that has led to the improvement of the housing and living conditions of hundreds of thousands of families in cities and towns throughout Indonesia. It has also served as a model for large-scale slum improvement programs in other developing countries. The Kampung Improvement Program in Surabaya, which has been particularly successful in mobilizing communities with extremely limited resources to improve and manage their own living environment, has upgraded over 70% of all kampungs in Surabaya, bringing a better quality of life to over 1 million people. The distinguished Mayor of Surabaya, Dr. Purnomo Kasidi, receiving the award. And the second winner is Tampines New Town, Singapore, executed by the Housing and Development Board, Singapore, by a careful selection and development of large satellite residential districts called new towns. The government of Singapore could confront extremely difficult spatial constraints to house its people and at the same time conserving its natural environment. Each new town provides affordable accommodations for lower and middle income groups together with the necessary facilities and services for their daily lives. The Tampines New Town is one of the most challenging new town projects undertaken in Singapore, designed and developed with the full involvement of the private sector. Once completed, will house over 250,000 residents once completed. Mr. Haswan Ouyang, Chairman of Housing and Development Board of Singapore, receiving the award. The Habitat Scroll of Honor Awards were initiated by the United Nations Center for Human Settlements in 1989 to honor and encourage individuals and organizations making outstanding contributions to the cause of shelter for the poor and for the improvement of human settlements conditions around the world. The distinguished Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Dr. Boutros Boutros-Ghali, will now present the Habitat Scroll of Honor to the recipients. This year's winners are New Urban Communities in Egypt, for implementing a program of establishing new communities in arid lands to counterbalance existing overcrowding urban areas and to increase opportunities for the national economy, while at the same time preserving fertile agricultural land. The distinguished Minister of Development, Housing, Utilities, and New Communities, His Excellency, Mr. Hasabala Mohammed El Karafawi of Egypt, receiving the award. Namuwongo Upgrading and Low-Cost Housing, Uganda. Oh, I see, yes. Is he going to speak? He's not going to speak. Yes. Namuwongo Upgrading and Low-Cost Housing in Uganda. For improving basic housing and related infrastructure and social facilities through participation of the community and mobilizing local resources. The distinguished Minister of Housing and Urban Development, the Honorable Mr. Eric Adriko of Uganda, receiving the award. Rural Housing Reconstruction with Appropriate Technologies, Ecuador, for its integral incorporation of cultural values, including self-help construction and mutual help with women's participation, and including training in appropriate building technologies. The distinguished permanent representative of Ecuador, His Excellency Dr. Jose Ayala Lasso, will receive the award on behalf of the winner. East Wadat Upgrading Project in Jordan, for outstanding achievements in improving the living conditions of low-income urban communities by applying new methods governed by the principles of affordability, replicability, and sustainability. The distinguished permanent representative of Jordan, His Excellency Mr. Adnan Abu Adeh, will receive the award on behalf of the winner. Earthquake Emergency Reconstruction and Rehabilitation Program, Nepal, for mobilizing the resources of a number of international and national agencies in a partnership with the people for rebuilding and upgrading of shelter and related facilities, incorporating self-help and the training of local artisans. The distinguished permanent representative of Nepal, His Excellency Dr. Tyaraj Acharya, will receive the award. Read it? Yes. Woodless Construction Project in Niger for promoting woodless building technologies based on earth vault and domed roof construction and undertaking training programs, thus serving as a model for sub-Saharan countries lacking wood resources. The representative from Niger is not here. Oh, yes. The distinguished permanent representative of Niger, His Excellency Amadou Seydou, will receive the award on behalf of the winner. Thank you. Mayor Jaime Lerner, Curitiba, Brazil, for his leadership in making Curitiba an exemplary, sustainable city, using integrated transit systems, linking the formal and informal economies, balancing necessity and possibility, and fostering civic spirit. The distinguished mayor of Curitiba, Mr. Jaime Lerner, will receive the award. World Relief El Salvador Housing Reconstruction Project, El Salvador, for promoting earthquake-resistant construction and community health and well-being at the grassroots level among victims of natural disasters through self-help efforts and measures to alleviate poverty for a better future for the families involved. Dr. Arthur Evans Gay, Jr., Executive Director, World Relief, will receive the award. Intermediate Technology Development Group, United Kingdom, for outstanding contributions to the human settlements development through systematic and innovative research in building materials and technologies, demonstration and dissemination of information in intermediate technologies for developing countries. Mr. Frank Almond, Chief Executive of Intermediate Technology Development Group, will be receiving the award. Habitat International Coalition, for bringing together a wide range of non-governmental organizations, community-based organizations, researchers, and academics in the field of human settlements into a global forum to recognize the contribution of the people and their organizations. Mr. Enrique Ortiz, Executive Secretary of Habitat International Coalition, receiving the award. The following winners of the Habitat Scrolls of Honor will receive the awards in their respective countries at ceremonies organized by the United Nations resident co-coordinators. Shenzhen Housing Bureau in China for its large-scale, high-speed construction of housing and public facilities to meet rapidly growing demand while maintaining adequate standards in the face of natural and socioeconomic constraints. Mr. Laurie Baker for his lifelong efforts while working in India as an architect, master craftsman, and promoter of cost-effective aesthetic housing, and in identifying innovative features of traditional building practices which could be easily adapted by local artisans. Mr. Yona Friedman for his lifelong search for innovative solutions to human settlements problems and his efforts to communicate scientific knowledge of building and construction techniques to the poor and deprived groups of developing societies. Mr. Rozanov Evgeny Grigorievich for his creative and scientific activities in the design and construction of settlements, redevelopment of town centers, restoration of earthquake damage, and directing major changes in the national housing policy. Mr. John F.C. Turner for pioneering a new approach to shelter development by popularizing the idea of enabling to build their own shelter and services with governments acting as facilitators. The formal ceremonies have now come to an end. I'd like to ask you to remain seated while the dignitaries leave the ECOSOC chambers. The panel by the National Committee for Habitat is now beginning. Kenneth Miller will open the panel. Mr. Miller.
Excellencies, honored guests, friends of the world's homeless, my name is Kenneth Miller. I'm president of the National Committee for Habitat. Our committee is the private sector arm of the United Nations Center for Human Settlements. Our objective is to encourage the private sector to become involved with the global problem of homelessness, to bring the genius and the expertise to solve the problem. The following distinguished panel of experts will discuss programs that exemplify the private sector-public sector partnership. We encourage all of you present to learn more about our committee and how we may work together. I would like now to introduce Dr. Mark A. Weiss, Professor and Director of the Real Estate Development Research Center at Columbia University. He is the author of several books on housing, including The Rise of Community Builders and the forthcoming Own Your Own Home, Housing Policy and Home Ownership in America. He has also co-authored a widely used real estate development textbook and is currently producing a national public television series on the history of urban development. Dr. Weiss is a frequent consultant to business and government. He's a senior vice president of the National Committee for Habitat. Dr. Weiss?
Thank you, Ken, for your very generous introduction, and thank you, Mr. Secretary General and distinguished delegates and ambassadors, for inviting us here to the United Nations to speak with you today. It's really an honor for all of us here on the panel to participate with you in this grand United Nations project of Habitat 2000, a project to make sure that everyone in the entire world has good quality, affordable housing in good communities by the end of this decade. We have a long way to go, and the UN Center for Human Settlements has been at this for a while, but with the help of everyone here and the models generated by the award winners and scroll winners today, I believe we will achieve our goal. I'd like to congratulate all of the award winners for the work that you've done and the people of your communities and countries that you represent and for which you're being honored. In working towards the goal of Habitat 2000 and considering the theme of shelter for sustainable development, we decided to take a particular tack around the concept of sustainable development with the notion that, and this is the purpose of this afternoon's panel, that the best way to sustain development is to get people involved at every level. And this means the private sector working in partnership with government, with communities, and as much local initiative as can be encouraged, and as I believe the awards exemplified. In approaching the theme for this year's World Habitat Day, we decided to focus on the role of the private sector and its partnership with government and community organizations in meeting the global housing challenge. We seek to explore ways that the entrepreneurial spirit can mobilize energy and talent and generate powerful incentives for private investment to attract the capital needed to build and rehabilitate homes, along with the infrastructure, services, businesses, and jobs that create and sustain successful communities. Also, we will emphasize opportunities to expand institutions designed to encourage capital formation and investment in residential development, including legal institutions such as property rights, financial institutions that enable mortgage markets to flourish, and community institutions to allow for democratic participation, environmental protection, and balanced growth. Our goal is to promote the maximum possible cooperation and coordination among the worldwide diversity of citizen efforts to achieve good quality, affordable housing for everyone. Now what I would like to do is introduce all together, in order that they will speak, the panel for this afternoon. The first speaker will be Franklin D. Raines. He is the Vice Chairman of the Federal National Mortgage Association, also known as Fannie Mae, which is an extremely important financial institution in providing mortgage capital for housing in the United States. Prior to joining Fannie Mae, Mr. Raines was a general partner in municipal finance in the investment banking firm of Lazard Frere and Company, and he also served in government in several positions, including Assistant Director of the White House Domestic Policy Staff. Following Mr. Raines will be Mr. Angelo R. Mazzillo. He is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Countrywide Funding Corporation of California, the largest mortgage banking firm in the United States, and he is also the President of the Mortgage Bankers Association of America, the national association that represents mortgage banking industry, an industry important to financing housing in this country and around the world. Following Mr. Mazzillo will be Mark Ellis Tipton. He is the President, CEO, Chief Executive Officer of the Whistler Corporation, a large home building firm in Raleigh, North Carolina. And he is also the immediate past president of the National Association of Home Builders, a 150,000 member association that represents the home building industry in the United States. As president of the association, Mr. Tipton worked to organize the Polish-American Home Builders Institute to spread principles of affordable housing development abroad, and he will speak on that subject today. The next speaker will be, the next two speakers will be our two award winners from the who received the awards from the Building and Social Housing Foundation. And by the way, I really want to congratulate and thank the foundation for making these awards available and setting such a high example. The first of the two speakers will be Mr. Purnomo Kasidi of Indonesia, and the second, Mr. Huswang Oyong of Singapore. In addition, two ministers of housing who are here today will also say a few words. Mr. Hasabala El Kafraoui of Egypt, Minister of Housing of Egypt, and Mr. Adriko, the Minister of Housing of Uganda. Okay. Excuse me, or as they once said on a well-known television show, never mind. We just have a change in the program. Representing Indonesia will not be Mr. Kasidi, but it will be Mr. Sorjono. Okay, moving along with our introductions. The next speaker will be Mr. Vincent Lane. Mr. Lane is the chairman of the Chicago Housing Authority, an authority that he took over in a distressed situation and turned it into a model of community development and mixed income and local initiative, and then took that model nationwide as the co-chairman of the National Commission on Distressed Public Housing in the United States. He is also the Chief Executive Officer of American Community Housing Associates, a firm that is redeveloping and managing nearly 50,000 units of private low and moderate income multifamily housing around the country. Next, we have Mr. Sheldon F. Good. He is the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Sheldon Good & Company, a Chicago-based national real estate marketing and consulting firm. It is the largest real estate auctioneer in the United States, and he is also a director of FIABSI, the International Real Estate Federation. He will be followed by Marilyn Melkonian, the president of Telesis Corporation in Washington, D.C., a community development and affordable housing firm currently developing over 1,000 units of affordable housing in the Parkside and Paradise neighborhoods of Northeast Washington. Ms. Melkonian was previously a housing policy attorney and Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And finally, our last panelist, Mr. Charles Buki, Director of Affordable Housing, Community Design and Development for the American Institute of Architects. He also oversees the Design for Housing project of the National Endowment for the Arts and previously directed the AIA's Search for Shelter program. I would like to say that unfortunately, because of some scheduling changes and a bit of an emergency, I will be leaving as moderator before the panel concludes, and at the point that I leave, Mr. Peter Kim, who is the Director of Housing and Urban Programs of the United States Agency for International Development, will take over as moderator to the conclusion of the panel. Please let me remind you that after the conclusion of the speaking part of the panel, you are all welcome, and we invite you to ask questions and engage in discussion so that we can search for shelter for sustainable development together. And following the conclusion of that discussion, there will be a reception to which you're all invited. Again, I, on behalf of all of us, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to speak with you today, and I'd like to introduce Mr. Franklin Raines.
Thank you very much. I am pleased to be here this afternoon. And in the next few minutes, I would like to describe Fannie Mae's role in the U.S. housing finance system and offer a skeletal housing finance framework for countries wishing to enhance affordable housing opportunities. I'll begin with a short history of Fannie Mae and our business. 54 years ago, Fannie Mae was created as a government agency to help assure the availability of home mortgage funds. We bought mortgage loans from lenders around the United States, savings and loans, mortgage companies, and commercial banks. We replenished lenders' funds so they could make additional loans, and we sold bonds and charged fees to help fund those purchases. In 1968, Fannie Mae became a private company. Our stock began trading publicly, and we became subject to the risk and discipline of the private market. But as a private company, we continue our public purpose. Our mission hasn't changed from our early days. We continue to make available affordable mortgage funds to low, moderate, and middle-income home buyers and renters, and we still purchase loans from a variety of lenders. A portion of those loans we hold in our portfolio, which now stands at $140 billion. The other loans we package into mortgage-backed securities. We now have over $400 billion of mortgage-backed securities outstanding. And we, along with sister entities, Freddie Mac and Ginnie Mae, are the heart of the U.S. secondary mortgage market. In the 1980s, Fannie Mae served 8.5 million families in every region of the country. And in 1992, Fannie Mae expects to fund 1 out of every 3 mortgages originated in the United States. Our mandate is to serve low, moderate, and middle-income families. The largely private U.S. housing finance system works well for the vast majority of Americans. Approximately 2/3 of American households own their own homes. In 1989, 68 million households, representing nearly 3/4 of all American households, lived in physically adequate, uncrowded, and affordable housing. But that means that 25% of all households suffered from one or more housing problem. And we are directing special efforts in association with over 500 partners nationwide to meet these special needs of Americans who are not yet well served by our housing finance system. In this thumbnail sketch of who Fannie Mae is and what we do, I've described some of the key elements to what we consider to be essential to a well-mobilized, successful, and accessible housing finance system: viable financial institutions and private-public partnerships. Now I'd like to outline a few steps I believe developing countries may take to create a successful housing finance system that will expand affordable housing opportunities to populations who need them. In any country, the supply of housing depends in large parts on the arrangements for financing. Well-developed internal financial markets and institutions encourage home ownership and construction of new rental and owner-occupied housing. They provide the best avenue for access to affordable housing opportunities. In many developing countries, however, less than 15% of housing construction is financed through housing finance institutions. So the first step is to design an institutional framework that helps borrowers to get loans they can afford and allows lenders to make those loans profitably. There are a number of ways financial institutions contribute to the housing finance system. An important one is to develop a diversity of methods to mobilize resources, including household savings. For example, in Hungary, the only savings bank is a state institution with a monopoly, and as a result, some households keep their savings in cash rather than depositing it in a financial institution. Competitive savings institutions can encourage savings by providing a competitive return and at the same time aggregating savings for investment. In Germany, the government provides a subsidy for low and moderate income people who save to buy a house. Another important way financial institutions can contribute is by designing a variety of instruments to address borrowing needs. When financial institutions extend housing finance opportunities to a broad spectrum of the population, they also encourage home ownership. For example, in South Africa, the Group Credit Company has provided mortgages for members of a cooperative and has experienced very low default rates. The formal housing finance institutions are now using this mechanism to provide additional funds for housing finance. Also, financial institutions may encourage public-private partnerships, such as voluntary organizations and other community-based groups, to include segments of the population that cannot be reached through traditional means. Finally, housing finance institutions may provide financial services for the home building industry, including construction and building materials. Finland, for example, is assisting Nicaragua in this type of endeavor. Government participation is the other crucial element for a well-developed and well-mobilized housing finance system. The backbone of the system, it provides the regulatory and fiscal framework for housing finance institutions and supervises them to ensure reasonable standards of safety and security. Government can seek to limit inflation to encourage the development of long-term housing finance. In countries where long-term funding is not readily available, credit insurance or a secondary market may be established. Governments may also offer tax and other incentives to enable institutions to build their capital and resources. And finally, it may provide subsidies directly to households rather than by subsidizing interest rates. I described public-private partnerships earlier and the vital role they play in the American housing finance system. For countries just entering into this arena, the international community can play an important part as a partner to developing nations. In many developing countries, formal financial mechanisms do not serve the poorest segments of the population, and therefore targeted assistance from the international community is all the more essential. The international development community now has several key options and opportunities to assist and encourage governments to design and adopt and promote housing development, including housing finance, to encourage and fund experimental projects, to ensure that their programs include the poor and disadvantaged, and to coordinate assistance amongst international donors. Where possible, Fannie Mae stands ready to help. Although we are not permitted to buy non-U.S. mortgages, we have served as consultants to a number of countries, including Australia, Turkey, Argentina, Hungary, Great Britain, and Poland. In Poland, for example, we are working on the development of a market-based housing finance system. People around the world share the desire for a home to call their own. Together, seeking solutions in forums like these, perhaps we can find some solutions to help those who need decent, affordable housing achieve their goal. I'm pleased to have been able to join you here in this discussion and hope that the work of this effort continues in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Angelo Mozzillo.
Is it on?
The light just on, yes.
That's okay. Thank you very much. It is a privilege and honor for me to have the opportunity to participate on this panel today, and also my congratulations to all of the recipients of the awards. Before arriving here in New York last evening, I was in Eastern Europe for the past 16 days. I was privileged to lead a delegation of mortgage bankers to 4 countries, 3 of which are arising from the oppressive shackles of totalitarianism, namely Russia, Poland, and Hungary. While there is no question that freedom for the Eastern Bloc countries is worth any sacrifice, these people are experiencing many dramatic changes to their whole social and economic structure, which obviously produces much uncertainty in their renaissance towards becoming independent and free nations. The unfortunate instability that the Eastern Bloc countries face, however, is not only due to this rebuilding process, but rather it is their citizens being denied the opportunity for safe and sound and sanitary housing, and in particular the opportunity for home ownership. In many cities of Eastern and Central Europe, it is common for families to have to wait 5 or 10 years to attain adequate housing, and this unfortunate condition is clearly unacceptable. Based on what I have seen, we can promote the freedom and glorious changes going on in Eastern Europe. We can hope for democratization of all societies throughout the world, but all of these hopes and promises of freedom and rebirth ring hollow if it lacks the one basic factor that binds a society together. That is the opportunity for private home ownership and adequate housing for all of the world's people. These emerging countries will never be as productive as they want to be, never as free as they are entitled to, never as mobile as they're needed to be, and never as comfortable as they should be until such time as the housing of the people of this world is given the highest of all priorities. Adequate housing is a basic right of all human beings, and home ownership is a privilege that must be made available to all of those who demonstrate the ability to fulfill home ownership responsibilities. No matter where a person lives, whether it is a one-room flat in St. Petersburg, a hamlet in Poland, a village in Hungary, or a borough in New York City, everyone has that same basic need for adequate, safe, and sanitary housing. In addition, the barriers of home ownership must be lowered in America and throughout the world. And more importantly, home ownership and adequate housing for all of the world's people must be a major priority of all governments throughout the world. Both the public and private sectors must take all of the necessary steps to liberalize the requirements for home ownership and rental housing, and to participate and particularly focus on those in our society who have been historically left behind. That is, those in our society who have been victims of bias and irrational ignorance. The private sector must keep the pressure on our elected officials to make them understand that no country can ever move forward, either economically or socially, without a strong and meaningful commitment to housing and to real estate in general. This is clearly our collective moment in time to impart our message to all who will listen and to make certain that every individual has the opportunity to achieve the dream of home ownership, and at minimum, that all peoples in our world of nations are housed adequately. In order for us to ensure the future of the present and succeeding generations, we must do everything possible to make certain that the dream of a life of freedom, the dream of a true economic opportunity, the dream of a predictable future, and the dream of home ownership and housing becomes a reality throughout the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Mark Tipton.
Thank you, Dr. Weiss. It is indeed a pleasure to be here today to participate in these discussions about the importance of private and public partnerships. And if we can all go home with one thing in mind, it's making the dream of home ownership a goal, a major goal for all the world, for all the people. As a trade association, the National Association of Home Builders strongly supports the private-public partnership. When the public sector can provide the funding and the private sector provides its unique expertise, we can address problems and develop solutions with far-reaching effect. But the entrepreneurs who will be creating this new industry can't look to others who are already established in a free enterprise home building business for guidance. They can't call upon older generations for assistance. There are none. Housing was always produced by the public sector in Poland. That's where NEHB comes into the picture, to assist in the creation of a private sector Polish housing industry. The National Association of Home Builders, in cooperation with the United States Agency of International Development, is establishing an American-Polish Home Builders Institute in Gdansk, Poland. It is the goal to create a housing organization that will organize the Polish home builders, help them work together to establish a private housing industry, facilitate direct U.S. capital investment and technology transfer to the Polish private housing industry, and provide construction management training for Polish home builders. After 3 years, this project will be self-sustaining and completely under Polish management. At the outset, the National Association of Home Builders will appoint a board of advisors consisting of prominent builders with international business experience, building product manufacturers interested in expanding operations in Eastern Europe, international financial experts, and international lending agency representatives. Also on board will be marketing specialists, key academic leaders, and experts on the politics and economics of Eastern Europe. They will oversee the implementation of the variety of initiatives under this contract to make the Institute a reality. The American Polish Home Builders Institute's office in Gdansk will work closely with the NEHB staff as well as the staff of the National Association of Home Builders Research Center and its educational arm, the Home Builders Institute. One of the Institute's primary responsibilities will be facilitating joint ventures between American builders with an interest in international opportunities and potential partners in Poland. It will develop a model plan for use by prospective joint venture partners, disseminate information about successful joint ventures, provide logistical support, help identify sources of money, and help match American and Polish firms with compatible objectives, resources, and skills. In addition, the National Association of Home Builders Research Center will carry out extensive surveys to assess the existing residential construction activity in Poland. And the Institute will conduct a detailed market analysis to determine such things as a demand for housing, consumer preferences for size, design, and amenities, income and housing expenditure patterns, existing housing supplies and costs, and how the Polish economy affects
housing. The analysts will also examine availability of skilled workers, raw materials, and specific housing components. It will also look into housing inventory, and then the database will be expected to include information about the infrastructure of each site, regulations affecting the site, proximity to shopping, community service, and jobs, the selling price, and ownership. It also will deal with the developing a system to work to maintain up-to-date legal, regulatory, and financial information for potential home builders and joint venture partners. As you can see, it's a very complex undertaking, but I think together we'll be able to, with the public-private sector, accomplish all of their goals. Also included in information about such things as the inflation, exchange rates, trade and tariff, currency and convertibility, lending practices, financing, real estate practicing, building codes, and title records. In cooperation with the National Council of Housing Industry, which represents America's most prominent building supply manufacturers, the National Association of Home Builders will work with the Institute to establish in Gdansk a display or demonstration to showcase U.S. building materials, technology, and equipment, and other housing-related products and services. And with the help of other funding sources, there will be a demonstration residential construction sites and other locations. NEHB's educational arm, the Home Builders Institute, will develop a construction management program for Polish builders incorporating the latest and best construction management methods practiced by the United States building industry. Ladies and gentlemen, we're looking forward as the National Association of Home Builders, an organization which represents the housing industry in America, to help institute the American Polish Home Builders Institute in Poland and wherever else is needed to provide affordable housing, decent, safe, and sanitary housing for all people of all over the world. We take tremendous pride in sharing the realization of a common dream with the Polish people, the dream of home ownership, one that we can make reality. Thank you.
Thank you. I've been asked to remind all of the panelists that the session is being recorded, which means two things. One, to press the button in front of you and wait a few seconds, 3-4 seconds before you begin speaking, and two, when you begin speaking, to state your name. So I'll follow my own advice. This is Mark Weiss speaking. Secondly, we've now reached the moment when I need to say my goodbye, and I'll do it very briefly. Take the opportunity, first of all and foremost, to thank all of the panelists for generously giving of their time, taking out of their busy schedules to prepare their remarks, travel long distances, and spend the afternoon here with you to convey their commitment and their ideas and their experience in solving the world's housing problems. I also want to again thank the United Nations for hosting us and for the work that it does, for all of the audience, for attending and the ways in which you participate in this effort, and just to say that it's really been my honor and privilege to be with all of you here today. And I'd like to now introduce the next speaker, the Minister of Housing for Egypt, one of the award winners, Mr. Hasabala El-Kafraoui.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. المهندس حسب الله الكفراوي، وزير التعمير والإسكان في جمهورية مصر العربية. لقد شرفت بالعمل كوزير الإسكان في جمهورية مصر العربية منذ حوالي 15 سنة، وأود في اختصار شديد أن أقدم التجربة المصرية التي أعتز بها جدا، وأفتخر بأن الله قد منحني الفرصة لأشارك فيها مع المجتمع المصري. بدأنا مواجهة مشكلة الإسكان في مصر، وكان معدل البناء في الإسكان الحضري 15,000 وحدة سكنية للمجتمع كله في السنة، وهي تقل كثيرا، يعني حوالي 1.12 وحدة سكنية لكل 1000 مواطن، وهو رقم منخفض جدا بالنسبة للأرقام التي تحققها البلاد التي لا تعاني من هذه المشكلة، وهو 7 وحدات لكل 1000 مواطن. مشكلة الإسكان كما تعلمون جميعا متعددة العناصر، فلبناء إسكان لابد أن يكون هناك أرض، مرافق، مواد بناء، عمالة حرفية، طاقة تشييد، تمويل، تشريع. كل هذه العناصر مؤثرة بكل التأكيد في مشكلة الإسكان، وواجهنا جميع هذه العناصر. وعلى سبيل المثال فيما يختص بالمرافق، ارتفع معدل استهلاك الإنسان المصري من 70 لتر مية شرب في اليوم في المتوسط على مستوى الجمهورية إلى حوالي 180 لتر في 91. ارتفع معدل إنتاج الأسمنت من 3 مليون طن في السنة إلى 16 مليون طن في السنة. ارتفع متوسط القروض من 5 مليون جنيه في السنة إلى 1100 مليون جنيه في السنة، وبالتالي فقد ارتفع متوسط الإنتاج، إنتاج الوحدات السكنية، من 15,000 وحدة سكنية إلى 166,000 وحدة سكنية عام 91-92. وارتفع نصيب الفرد من 1.2 وحدة سكنية لكل 1000 كما قلت إلى 7.5 وحدة سكنية لكل فرد في سنة 91-92، أي تضاعف الإنتاج 11 مرة، وارتفع معدل حصة الفرد حوالي 6 مرات مقابل زيادة عدد السكان. في ذات الوقت أحب أن أقول أن تكلفة الإسكان الذي نسميه في مصر منخفض التكاليف، الذي يواجه احتياجات أو يلبي احتياجات الإنسان المصري الذي له دخل ثابت مستقر ومستديم، تكلفة الوحدة السكنية حوالي بين 4,000 دولار، ما يوازي 4,000 دولار أمريكي و5,000 دولار أمريكي. وأنا أقول في هذا المجتمع وبين هؤلاء الخبراء، بعتقد أن هذا الرقم ليس له وجود في بلد آخر كما أعلم. يعني حققنا مستوى عالي جدا من ضغط التكاليف في إنشاء الوحدات السكنية. أقول هذا بهدفين: أولا، إذا كانت هناك مجتمعات قد حققت معدلات أفضل من هذه المعدلات، أرجو أن أتعلم ونتعلم مصر وتستفيد من تجربتها، ونضع تجربتنا في ذات الوقت في خدمة أي مجتمع صديق للاستفادة بها. فبالتأكيد أن ما يتحقق جدير بالدراسة وجدير بالمتابعة. وقد طلبت من الأخ الصديق راما شندران رئيس منظمة الهابيتات عقد ندوة في القاهرة حول هذه الأرقام وحول هذه المعدلات، وزيارة هذه المواقع والتعرف على الأساليب التي حققت لمصر هذه النتائج. الهدف الآخر كلنا تكلمنا هنا أن هناك مشكلة إسكان في جميع بلاد العالم حتى أمريكا، وتحدث المندوب الأمريكي وقال أن 25% من المجتمع الأمريكي ما زال يعاني من مشكلة الإسكان، وقطعا هذا هو حال الشعب المصري، فنحن في أول الطريق. قلت أننا أتحنا قروض ارتفعت من 5 مليون جنيه في السنة ل 1100 مليون جنيه في السنة، بمعدل فايدة حوالي 6%. لقد طلبت لقاء الأخ ممثل الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية للتحدث حول ما قد يساعد في إتاحة قروض بمثل هذه الفايدة أو بمثل سعر الفايدة ده، أو قطعا يكون أفضل لو تحقق سعر فايدة أقل لمواجهة هؤلاء الذين نسميهم الهومليس بيبول أو الذين ليس لهم مأوى. فهم أولا وأخيرا مواطنون آدميون، إنسان جدير بكل الرعاية وبكل المساعدة وبكل المساندة. فكلمتي لكل المجتمعات التي تستطيع أن تساهم في تدبير تمويل يساعد على مواجهة مشكلة الإسكان لهؤلاء الذين نطلق عليهم جميعا الهومليس بيبل. شكرا لكم جميعا على إتاحة هذا الوقت، وشكرا على هذا اللقاء، وأتمنى أن نلتقي دائما على خير الإنسانية، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Okay. I would next ask that the Assistant Minister of Housing for Indonesia, Mr. Sujono, take the floor.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, housing development policies and programs in Indonesia has been gradually and continuously developed during the past 25 years. In the Indonesian urban society, the majority of the population, say 70 to 90%, particularly those belong to the lower income groups, are satisfying their housing need through informal sector developments, and only a smaller part of the housing delivery is undertaken by the formal sector. The most significant urban housing and settlements programs in Indonesia are kampung improvements programs, site and services, and low-cost housing developments. If we have just a proud of success in the kampung improvements program, as we experience in the city of Surabaya and in the other Indonesian cities, as a concept of community-based developments, we are still facing major problems in the expansion of formal low-cost housing developments. The formal urban housing developments, including that of the low-income housing, are undertaken by the government sector as well as by the private sector. The major problem we are facing in this regard is the affordability of the low-income urban population. Over 60% of the Indonesian urban families cannot afford a minimum low-cost housing standard of 21 square meter floor area through the formal sector developments. In Indonesia, private sector is considered as not purely private business for maximum profit orientation, but also as government's partner in achieving the mission to provide affordable shelter for the society, which majority are low income. Within the framework of equitable distribution of national development policy, the private sector has to share an increasing social responsibilities. The role of the private sector has been gradually increased during the past 20 years. Larger share of low and moderate cost housing developments has been undertaken by the private sector. For example, in the present fifth five-year plan, in which 450,000 low-cost housing units are targeted, 330,000 units are expected to be delivered by the private sector and 120,000 units by the government-owned National Housing Development Corporation. To facilitate the private sector housing developments, the Indonesian government is to create a conducive atmosphere for private sector developments through easier access to land, urban infrastructure, and credit facilities. The present major low-cost housing policy is the provision of interest rate subsidy for low-cost housing ownership. The subsidy is well directed and limited to low-cost housing home ownership of 21 square meter floor area and site and services plots of 54 to 72 square meter. Home ownership loan for such low-cost housing units is mainly extended by the State Savings Bank. Home ownership loan of 21 square meter low-cost housing bear interest rate of 12% per annum, and the interest rate of ownership loan of very low-cost housing units and the sites and services unit is 10% per annum. For your information, the market interest rate in Indonesia is approximately 24% per annum. The amortization period of the home ownership loan is up to 20 years. A new housing and settlements development policy is now being developed for the simulation of large-scale mixed community developments undertaken both by the public, the private sector, and the community-based developments. The new policy will require a certain ratio between the various housing types to the luxurious, the medium, the low, and the very low-cost housing units to be developed on the same site. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, the private and communal sectors has played and will be playing an increasing role in the provision of affordable shelter in Indonesia. It is, however, has to be managed and directed in association with the share in the social responsibilities within the national development. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I next call upon one of our award winners, Mr. Hu Xiang Yang of Singapore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, the Housing and Development Board of Singapore is greatly honored today to receive this World Habitat Award a little while ago. And I also want to thank you for giving us this opportunity to say a few words about our operations at this panel discussion. The Housing and Development Board was established in the year 1960, and this year we are 32 years old. During this period, we have actively promoted home ownership policy, and as a result, today 87% of the people in Singapore live in estates we built. And out of this 87%, 90% of the people own their own flats. We believe this probably is a record somewhere in the world, but we cannot be sure. And now the reasons we have been able to come this far, I would say, first, we have very good encouragement from the government. That facilitates a great deal in our long-term planning. And secondly, we pay a lot of attention to the aftercare, such as the maintenance and upkeeping of the estates after we finish building them. In other words, our job will not just be finished as soon as we hand over the apartments to the buyer. We make sure that they are kept in the condition we like to see. Now, the third element has to do with the pricing of these flats, these apartments. In order to enable the great majority of people in Singapore to buy these apartments, we cannot price them strictly based on market prices. Instead, we have to look at the affordability element of the buyers. And lastly, we have a social security system which encourages very large amount of savings. And from this large pool of savings, we have been able to ensure that the buyer of these apartments will have no problem in financing the purchases. So very shortly, these are what we consider to be the key elements of our success. Now, I'd like to say a few words about our policy and our perception of home ownership. We take a long view on what we do. So our planning actually today goes to the year of 2040. Of course, it's difficult to plan that far ahead, but at least I think it's advisable to look at the demographic aspect. For instance, what kind of population we will have by that year. And so we are already planning to have enough space and land to build enough apartments for 4 million people against the 2.8 million people we have today. Also, we are not just interested in building a few blocks of flats here and there, or even a few new towns here and there. Our approach is on a total living environment. We want to make sure that people not only get good flats, good apartments to live in, but also they have a very attractive environment to go along with it. Now, for instance, the land use, from the figures on the land use, perhaps you can see what I mean. In each new town we build, only 1/3 of the land is used for residential purpose. Then 34% of the land is for facilities and amenities such as schools, parks, sports complex, garden. We make sure that there's plenty of open space for everyone to move in. And 14% of the land would be for industrial use. And finally, 19% of the land would be for industrial use, and then 14% for commercial use. This is pretty much the formula we use for all the new towns. To accommodate 87% of the 2.7 million people, we have to have quite a number of new towns, and today we have 22 new towns. Each new town will accommodate from 100,000 people to, say, about 300,000 people. And from time of planning to the time it's completed, each new town, I would say is about from 8 to 10 years. I'd like also to say a few words about the private sector involvement in all this. Actually, out of the close to 700,000 units of apartments we've built so far, all of them were built by private sector contractors. In other words, what we do at the board is that we plan, we design, and we specify what we want. But we let the private sector contractors to come in, and we award the contracts on a tender basis. Of course, the one that would give us the best price advantage will get the contract. But we do the supervising. We make sure that these flats are built according to our specification. And we have inspectors on the site all the time to make sure that they are up to our standard. But so in a way, you cannot say that the private sector cannot be, well, I would say the private sector is really totally involved as far as the construction part is concerned. Now, in the last few years, some also new developments have enabled the private sector to become more actively involved in our projects. For instance, in the area of estate management, until 3 years ago, we practically maintain and upkeep all the flats we build. But now we have a new system. Each new town now will form their own town council by the residents. This is a concept similar to the private sector condominium concept. So the residents will have all the say as to what kind of living environment they want to live in. And then the residents will also have the freedom to choose any real estate agent to manage that estate. In other words, they no longer have to just come to the Housing Development Board for assistance. They can engage any private sector real estate manager to do the work. So in that respect, the private sector is further involved. Now lately, we have gone one step further. We have actually asked the private sector architects and contractors to form teams to bid for our projects. The first one, 600 units, was awarded only a few months ago. Now these new units are first designed by private sector architects, and then they together form a team with private sector contractors to bid for the contract. And then all we're concerned with is to make sure that, of course, these units are built at the lowest possible cost and with the highest quality standard. And we intend to continue to do much more of this in the months and years to come. And finally, to encourage the private sector to get one step closer to what we have been doing, we've been selling a lot of land at the around the housing estates to the private sector to encourage them to build condominium and also to build commercial shops and facilities and so on. So you can say that, of course, once the, well, people would ask the question that after we have put 87% of people in public housing, is there life after 87%? I would say definitely there is, because our job is really moving into another direction, and this is to get the private sector much more involved from this point forward. Thank you very much.
I'd like to introduce Vincent Lane, who's the chairman of the Chicago Housing Authority.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is a pleasure for me to be here today to share some of the experiences that I've had at the Chicago Housing Authority over the last 4 years, and to hear some of the things that have occurred around the world as it relates to housing. Rather than dwell on, go into details about the various programs that we have implemented at the Chicago Housing Authority, I want to deal with some concepts. I think that clearly in this country, we've done a lot of positive things in the housing community. However, we've also made some serious mistakes. And I think that perhaps the world could learn from some of the mistakes that we've made here in our housing and our public policy. We need fundamental change in the way that we look at providing housing, to build units of housing, the box that people traditionally think of providing housing, without building in communities, without fixing the problems that people have, low-income people who have to live in this housing, will give us basically what we have today, and that is communities which don't work. We should not make the mistakes that we've made in the past. We really must get away from the concept of having poor people stacked on top of poor people. That concept is flawed and does not work. We also somehow think that the poor communities in the world are somehow related to race and ethnicity. That there could be nothing further from the truth. The reasons that we have poor communities, devastated communities, is because of the socio-economic environment that we present people in these poor communities. Literally, in this country, we're now looking at third and fourth generation of welfare families where the children see nothing but their mothers, their grandmothers, and today their great-grandmothers waiting for a handout. We have to change that. Because a person is poor does not mean that he cannot do things to help himself. Clearly, we should maintain high standards, the same standards for everyone, poor and those who are not poor. And we should help the poor with supports to rise to meet those high standards. We've done it at the Chicago Housing Authority, where 4 years ago it was the worst housing authority in the country. How did we do it? We did it because we addressed three things that you must address in order to turn the tide. One is a safe community. Nobody, no matter what their income, wants to live in an unsafe environment. We must address public safety. Two is clean and decent housing, not luxury, but basic, clean and decent housing. And then finally, we must have incentives there, economic incentives, which motivate us all, regardless of where we come from, to improve our situation. We took gang-ridden and graffiti-strewn property and reintroduced working families alongside welfare families, and after a year, we begin to see of 141 welfare families that 12 of them have full-time jobs and 15 others are in training for full-time jobs, and there is no crime and there is no graffiti, and we are beginning to see a community emerge because we're talking about a socio-economic mix. We must involve the private sector. The government sector alone cannot do it. And what we have to acknowledge is that there is nothing wrong with doing well while doing good. The economic incentive motivation that drives all of us is something that we can use to all of our advantage in building communities that work. We can't just build housing. We've got to build communities, and in order to build communities, we've got to address jobs, we've got to address economic development. Hopefully, next year this time, we will be able to share with you some job creation methods and programs that we're putting into place. It is government's duty not to give handouts, but to give a hand up. We have the resources, we have the knowledge. Now we all have to work together to use it. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Sheldon Good, a director of the International Real Estate Federation, known to many of you as FIAPSI.
I'm here as a member of the International Federation, a group of real estate owners and developers from 50 countries throughout the world, with 7,000 of the leading real estate people in the world. An organization that's been in existence for 40 years, we provide an international forum to deal with solving the real estate problems of the world, of which, of course, affordable housing is an important one. Our people, after every meeting, go back to their governments and to their countries and to their leaders with a story of affordable housing, which will create a stability in your country that will pay back many times for your citizens in the form of a better life and a better citizen. We were pleased last year to be in Singapore, our organization, FIAPSI, and we're very, very much impressed with what you've done there in Singapore. It's interesting because many of my notes follow along the same line as the comments that you made about Singapore and your housing programs. I must congratulate Vince Lane. I'm from Chicago. I know him. I know the job he's tackled and done a very good job at. Very tough, our housing, affordable housing and public housing in Chicago. But one thing we know for sure, that concentrated high-rise, high-density living is difficult and not working. We know that the scattered site, new housing in deteriorated neighborhoods is difficult and not working well. It's hard to attract and keep families in those communities that are not safe and secure. We know that many of the church and various not-for-profit neighborhood groups that are acquiring RTC, VA, Fannie Mae foreclosed properties and trying to retrofit them to meet the community are not working well either, primarily because the community may not warrant the redoing of these units. The people involved are undercapitalized and inexperienced in retrofitting and managing the properties once they are acquired and delivered to the public. We think that we're dealing with people, again, Vince, and that's what you said, placing people in their lives and their families in a place where they live and deal on an everyday basis. And we think that they want low-rise housing, that they want rental and ownership units together that are not recognizable as being ownership and rental units, that there's a need for daily acceptance and family growth, that open space and green areas and economic integration is necessary, as well as parks and schools and child care centers and athletic fields and community centers, and security and safety is guaranteed, as well as churches and the Boy Scouts and all the things that we wanted in the good old days from our neighborhoods. Environment is very, very important. That will stimulate neighborhood and self-worth of the people who live and work in these communities. We need, in order to provide these, responsive landowners, people that can make the land available for these developments and for these environmental units. There has to be a need, of course, for developing the affordable housing in these particular communities. We need responsive governments that can provide tax abatement and financial subsidies. And of course, we need experienced developers. We have a wonderful project that was announced in Chicago. I know that Vince and I discussed it at lunch today, and I'll read you part of the release that they put out. This is a 55-acre industrial site, 2 blocks from the public transportation and expressways, 4 miles from downtown Chicago, 8 blocks to the medical district, and 2 blocks from the major park system in Chicago. And this is the release reads this way. Sears Roebuck and Company and the Charles Shaw Company today are studying the feasibility of a multi-phase development to build new rental and for sale affordable housing for low and moderate income families on a portion of 55-acre site of the Sears former headquarters in the city's west side. Known as Homan Square, the mayor said, "We are very pleased with the decision of Sears to act as a catalyst in proposing this very significant and constructive development program for the community." Sears and the West Side Affordable Housing Group, a not-for-profit Illinois corporation, have formed a joint venture which will seek public and private funds to assist the development to be called the Homan Square area. Sears will contribute the appropriate land and certain other financial support to the venture, while the Shore organization will serve as development planner and manager. Now I can go further into this maybe in our question and answer period. It's interesting. There'll be a total of 600 units. They plan to use 25% of the ground for green and open space. There will be, the first phase will be 80 units of townhouses, 2- and 3-story townhouses, commingled rental and sale units, 56 for rent, 24 for sale. The design of the units will be the same, and you will not be able to tell the rental units from the for sale units. They run in various sizes. As I said, 24% of it's in building area. I think that we in Chicago continue to make every effort to provide affordable housing for our people and our citizens in the environment in which they can raise and feel safe in doing so, their families, and we suggest continually to achieve a goal of affordable home ownership. If we can't do it in the city of Chicago, the city that works, it can't be done anywhere. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Marilyn Melkonian, the president of the Telesis Corporation.
Thank you very much. Very happy and feel privileged to be here today to share with you some of the experiences that we have had in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, in building, as Mr. Lane has said and others have said, not just housing but communities, and communities that sustain all of the things that are needed for the good life. That means not only a decent place to live, but decent educational opportunities, opportunities for jobs, opportunities for health care, opportunities for the old to be secure and safe. The community that I've spent the last 6 years working with is known as the Paradise Parkside community in Washington, D.C. It's not too much more than a mile from the Capitol building of the United States. About 6 years ago, it was probably one of the most dangerous communities, certainly in Washington and possibly on the East Coast. It was the largest open-air drug market in Washington, D.C. About 5 years ago, a combination of organizations, both public and private, were brought together with the purpose of creating a model comprehensive community development in this devastated neighborhood. The actors were the city of the District of Columbia, its Department of Housing and Community Development, a private insurance company based in Washington, D.C., the Consumers United Insurance Company, a major national nonprofit organization called the Trust for Public Land, which was willing to act as an interim landowner in this community, and then subsequently a host of public and private investors, including the federal government and also government-sponsored enterprises, including the Fannie Mae organization represented by Mr. Raines here today. In addition, private pension funds were made available for loans in the community from the AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust. This was a joint effort involving a neighborhood of about 7,000 people. It involved the renovation of 1,700 multifamily housing units, the conversion of a large publicly owned housing project to home ownership, the restoration of a garden apartment complex as affordable rental housing, and ultimately its conversion to home ownership in the cooperative form of ownership, retail, commercial, health, and civic facility development, employment and training programs, and a youth development program. The purpose of this development was not only to improve the immediate living conditions, but also to create a way that development could be sustained and opportunities could be sustained for this community into the future. Because of the illegal activities, the violence, and the dangerous nature of the community, it was valued at a very low ebb. In fact, it was considered to have negative value. But through this redevelopment, which was done in partnership with the residents themselves who charted their own course about what they wanted to see happen in this community, the value of the land in this neighborhood has increased dramatically. There's a significant equity that's been created, what we call a community equity, over and above the cost of actually developing the property. And that equity, which will probably be in the neighborhood of $4 to $5 million after all costs are paid, will remain available to the community as an endowment that will continue to fund educational opportunities, training opportunities for the people who live in the neighborhood. This has been, as I said, a very unique development. I think probably the most comprehensive neighborhood development project in the country, given all the different participants. But it has demonstrated beyond the question of a doubt that such efforts can be successful even in the face of the most difficult circumstances. And that investment pays off. It pays off in prosperous local economies, in educated children, and in a better future for neighborhoods that otherwise would be a source of taking money from the community for all of the negative things that a community requires when it is in such dire straits. We believe there are many lessons in this development for what we call wealth-creating investments in the United States and possibly around the world. The White House has put out a figure recently, when it was concerned about these things, as to what the cost of not addressing these kinds of problems can be nationally in the United States. And the figure they put on leaving these problems to fester and the negative consequences to develop is $750 billion. And what we have learned in doing a project like Parkside is for such a small investment relative to those costs, we're able to turn around negative situations and create wealth in communities. I think there's a lesson to be learned that public-private partnerships are the vehicle for being able to transform situations, the public providing resources, investment, and the private partner providing the delivery system for the things that neighborhoods need. I was very interested to hear the other experiences that have existed in even more difficult circumstances and the kind of growth that is taking place uniquely and especially all over the world. And obviously, fundamentally, we all have the same goals. People want and need the same things. They want a decent home, they want a safe community, they want education for their children so that their children's lives can be better, and they want health care when they need it and so they can afford it, and they want the opportunity to live their older years in safety, dignity, and security. These are the things that are the cornerstone of what people want and need no matter where they live, and I'm happy to be part of a forum that is sharing that experience today. Thank you very much.
And our last panelist is Mr. Charles Buchey of the American Institute of Architects.
Thank you, Peter, Ken Miller. It's a privilege and an honor to be here this afternoon, represent the American Institute of Architects, and comment briefly on sustainable development and quality design. By the way, it's no accident that the representative of the American Institute of Architects speaks last. Most affordable housing projects look to their architect after all the numbers have been worked out, the land's been purchased, and then they try to reduce some of the fees involved and look at the architect as a frill. So what I want to do is comment briefly about the role of the architect in improving value, reducing risk, adding overall enhancement, property appreciation over time, giving you a better product for the money you've got to spend, which, as you all know, is scarce. Sustainable development is managed growth. It is the fulfillment of the human obligation in times of peace to provide for across-the-board dignity. It is an expansion in number and complexity that, unbridled, can have catastrophic effects. The impact we humans have on one another and on our planet can have and has been and will continue to be severe unless we manage the way we live. Architecture, at once structural, practical, and visual, impacts us all. Architecture not only contributes to the growth of civilization, it gives mankind the chance to last. No other profession so focuses its intent and skill on improving the human condition and doing so in a lasting and comprehensive, indeed sustainable way. Architecture that is not useful is sculpture, but it is also true that architecture without beauty is mere utilitarian construction. Societies have proven their ability to construct the functional, to meet our basic biological needs in cost-effective ways. The challenge before the political structure and the building industries today in every country is to move forward further and cost-effectively to create a sustainable ladder of housing opportunity to more people in a more dignified manner. The architect is part of a continuum of professional effort in the United States and elsewhere, struggling to give meaning to our built environment beyond the artistic but within the functional. In short, a collaborative endeavor to construct sustainable form that does not sacrifice durability for cost, dignity for political appeasement, an effort to recognize that inexpensive is not the same thing as cheap, and that form that does not foster and sustain human dignity is nothing to be proud of. When it comes to shelter, architects are the single and essential common professional denominator among the financiers, policymakers, land use planners, and environmentalists, the critical link between value and amount, the bridge between human rights and human obligations. Architects can be the conscience of our international efforts to manage growth, to be sustainable as a species. We are all architects of one sort or another, all contributing thought and deed to our universal improvement. Each of us knows intrinsically the importance of meeting human needs, the vitalness of our countrymen's well-being. To be sustainable as a people, we now face the difficult task of meeting our human obligations. For as the Cold War recedes, a mildly famous architect in the impoverished Mississippi Delta of the southern United States aptly noted not long ago, no longer is it necessary to come to the defense of human rights when now the imperatives demand that we rise to compel human obligation. Thus, our potential as delegates to the endeavors to shelter one another with dignity is what we make of it. But it is also what we realize shelter to be, what we envision it can become, how important we hold human dignity to be in the scheme of things. The need for basic shelter is shared by all humans. It is second only to the need for food and water. The fact is that the reach of man's potential extends only as far as it can stretch in times of peace. In this regard, having been neither forced to defend our coasts for nearly 2 centuries nor declare war on ourselves for nearly 1, Americans have been extremely fortunate. We have been fortunate enough to comparatively well get on with the business in an uninterrupted way of making cities and highways, farms and research laboratories, places to live well and houses to live in. Indeed, most would have to agree that the production of housing in the United States, particularly in the post-World War II period, has achieved remarkable levels of quantity and quality in unprecedented numbers, housing hundreds of millions of Americans comfortably and affordably. Most, but by no means all, Americans do live very well in decent housing and good and safe, sustainable neighborhoods. In support of the power of the private marketplace, there exists a vast nexus of federal policies at work to respond to the American public's demand for housing. The challenge now facing the American building industry is to achieve even greater reach, to provide more and better housing at a lower cost, to provide dignified shelter for everyone, and then, if successful, to export abroad whatever new successes we achieve. As demand has accelerated in times of expansion, the American housing industry, largely and comparatively unrestrained by needless regulation, has shown the ability to respond swiftly and accurately to the marketplace. Furthermore, quality housing is today accessible to a striking majority of Americans, an achievement due in no small measure to the confluence of 5 critical events. 1, a strong national housing policy that's been in effect since 1934. 2, banking policies which have historically closed the gap between inflation and interest rates. 3, federal tax policies that have historically promoted maintenance. 4, secondary markets that have facilitated aggregate savings. And 5, a linked contingency of private sector building industries that together comprise a continuum of service to American housing demand. Architects in the United States are part of this continuum of effort, and it is the architect who plans for an ever-changing future, who is sensitive to the demands of the marketplace as well as to the unmet needs of the poor, who is best equipped to address issues of quality, livability, density, planning, and dignity. This has not always been the case. Our Pruitt-Igos and Robert Thompsons are monuments to past failures by architects who strive to address poverty in the vacuum that did not thoroughly enough consider dignity and spirituality and the power of entrepreneurial capitalism. Our Newarks and our Camdens and our South Central LAs are edifices to our thinking that the physical environment alone shapes our destiny, as if somehow humanity and community mattered less than bricks and mortar. But we are learning. When trying to build shelter that poor people can live in, as opposed to housing for the poor, we are listening to the Chicago Housing Authority. Architects and urban planners and community lenders are now beginning to create housing opportunities that can be financed within existing commercial products and public supports. Architects are working to improve the physical environment while not any longer ignoring those attributes that make a place livable and sustainable. Architects in the United States operate in a comparatively under-regulated building environment, and their contributions to increasing quality without increasing costs have been a major contributing factor towards the American goal of making affordable housing more available to those as yet unserved by existing practices and policies. As we all try to survive in the global economy, it is the work of the architect that can enable man to not merely endure, but, as the Nobel Prize-winning writer William Faulkner noted nearly 30 years ago, to prevail. It is imperative that we remember that the people who need quality design the most may very well be those who can afford it the least. In the free exchange of ideas between our Sowetos and our Pragues, it is the fusion of art and science that gives us our best opportunity to provide and sustain what Rome believed critical: commodity, firmness, and delight. It is the combined vision of the architect, the engineer, and democracy which gives us our best chance to not only fight poverty but foster dignity. It is the free exchange of ideas and the commitment to managing the growth of civilization across continents and oceans that will be our ennobler. Thank you.
That completes the presentation by our panelists. I would invite anyone in the audience who has any questions of any of the panelists, or anyone who would have a statement of any